Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are here for my NACL Round 5 and Round 6, which just so happens to be the semifinals overview and analysis. I'm really excited to get into this one. The semifinals actually just ended as I'm recording this now, so you know I'm getting it up to date. This was one of the few days that we actually could fit a video in. The schedule is absurd right now with every region being in playoffs and all of those playoff series needing to be covered, but we're going to be covering 3 series in this video. We're going to be going over both of the series in Round 5. That means winners finals as well as the 4th place game, and then we will also be covering losers finals here to see who ends up making it to grand finals later this weekend. I'm incredibly excited, I should say, to go over this. If you are as well, let me know down in the comment section below. Which of the 4 teams left did you like the most? Did you like Cloud9 or Dignitas up in winners? Did you like Team Liquid or Fear down in losers? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions, and let's just go ahead and get started. We've got 3 series to go through, and we're going to be kicking it off with the series that kicked off the weekend for us, and that is winners finals. The 2 teams that are left in winners bracket, the only 2 teams to not drop a series in playoffs so far. We had a matchup between Cloud9 challengers and Dignitas challengers that Dignitas was able to win 3-1. Unbelievable stuff coming out here from Dig. Really well done from them. Honestly, I didn't expect them to be able to take this series. I thought Cloud9 was leaps and bounds better than every other team in the NACL. I'm going to be entirely honest. Unfortunately for Cloud9, that was not the case in this game because they just were kind of outmatched in a lot of these games. You can see Dig took game 1 and game 2, and then, they lost game 3. We'll get to that, and then they took game 4. But games 1 and 2, I would say good games from Dig. Definitely a little bit more back and forth than I think some of the scores would show, but Dig definitely in control. Insanity playing really well in the first couple of games, and Hoon in particular. When you're looking at game 1, Hoon's probably my player of the game in game 1, but Insanity and XU both played really well, and when you're looking at game 2, honestly, bot lane was really good. Spawn got super far ahead on the Zeri. Diamond did a good job being able to enable him, but Hoon played well in that one as well. The beginning part of the series really was Hoon, but then we get into that game number 4, which is just where Insanity goes absolutely off on this Aurelion Sol. He's going to get my player of the series. I think some people are going to want to see the Dignitas top laner get that, and I totally understand. I think Hoon was very influential in this series, and we'll get to him in a second, but I do want to be giving out my player of the series to the player that I think played the best over the course of the entire series, and that to me was Insanity in the mid lane, who was just really good here. I know I've been very critical of Insanity throughout the year. I've said things that other analysts definitely would not back up, which is, things such as, like, this being one of his worst NACL splits or Academy splits or whatever you want to say, but that's only because I have ridiculously high expectations for what he is going to be able to put out. He has shown that he, quite frankly, should be the best mid laner at this level. There really isn't a lot of talent that I would say has proven more before than Insanity at this level and even at levels above this, and so he really should be the best mid laner here, and he just wasn't consistent enough over the course of the year. Dignitas didn't really want to play for him, even when they ended up losing Spawn, or Tomo and Spawn came in. They didn't want to let, Spawn get acclimated by playing somewhere else first. They really just felt like they had to play through bot lane a lot of this year, I would say, overall in the early game, and Insanity, I think, definitely suffered for that, especially in the mid to late game, but I'm gonna be honest, like, even if you were low on his regular season, which I know I might be the only one who says that, you cannot be low on how he has played in the playoffs. He has completely taken over pretty much every series that he has played in the playoffs so far. He's been one of the best, if not the best performing member of any team in the playoffs. He's probably playoff MVP for me right now. He's just been so good for this Dignitas team, and this series was no exception. Like I said, especially in that game 4 on Aurelion Sol, but he was still really good, especially in that game 1 on Ahri as well. The Taliyah game, not so much, but we'll get to game 3. That was really the only game where Cloud9 actually kind of dominated, quite frankly. This was the most dominant game of the series, and Cloud9 was able to take it, but outside of that, it very much looked like Dignitas had control of everything. So the Ahri, the A-Sol, and Insanity in general, it really just feels like he has honed in on a lot of his strengths, and the team is playing around him more, especially in the mid to late game, and I think that's really helped them out a lot. I think Hoon was also excellent in this series. Game number 1 was so fun to watch on the Sion. That could actually be a pretty interesting comp to play Sion into. There's not really a lot of tools to be able to deal with him if he is able to get, like, completely in. Like, you're obviously obviously you've got Wukong or Cassante for disengage, but outside of that, there really isn't a lot of things. Like, Sylas can do a bit. Nami's not really going to be able to deal with him if he ults in, and so there's really not a lot you can do on that front. Like, Sion's just going to be a problem this game, especially if he's able to get ahead, and Hoon was much better than Fake God across this series, just in general. That Sion game was great. The Gwen game was really good in game number 2, and I do want to give a shout out to the Cassante game in game 4 as well. It might not have been as, like, obviously impactful, but I do think that he did a really good job playing into that Malphite and keeping that pick from being, you know, super duper relevant. The solo laner is definitely stepping up and being the main focal points, quite frankly, for Dignitas, but it was a team effort. XU had some great games, a really fun Lee Sin game in game number 1. Diamond and Spawn looked really good. I'm super high on Diamond, and everybody knows my history with Spawn on this channel. I don't have to go into too much to kind of talk about why I think he is super good and underrated, and, you know, obviously just things were going disastrous on Dignitas, and it didn't help his mental at all, but he's getting his groove back, and he's been one of the more dominant AD carries since he returned here to the NACL. A really good Zeri game in game 2. Diamond looking great on the Rakan, basically the entire series. They wanted to play it basically no matter which AD carry they got, they just wanted to keep it away from the other, from Cloud9. Zeyzal's a really good Rakan player, someone who wants to opt into that pick a lot, and so Diamond felt comfortable playing it basically whenever, with anything. With Xayah, with Zeri, with Jinx, it didn't really matter. He was able to take it, and it really worked out. Overall, Dignitas was just super complete, and this pushes them on to Grand Finals. They are guaranteed a top 2 slot in the NACL, an absolutely massive split for a Dignitas team that I really wasn't sure what we were going to get when we moved into playoffs, but they've exceeded every expectation that I've had, and maybe even the most positive people could have possibly had. This team is dominant, and they look unstoppable right now. As for Cloud9 on the other side, certainly not nearly going to be as positive in this one, but it's okay. You've maintained your extra life up until this point in the playoffs, and so this loss isn't going to completely eliminate you from this season, but I would have liked to see a little bit more fight. Some of the positives to take away, Game 3. Game 3 was honestly just awesome. They dominated early, they were able to get a really strong lead, and then they held it. They closed it out really quickly as well. There were basically no mistakes from Cloud9 on that side. I think Fake God in particular played awesome on the Gnar. Really fun game there. Tomio had a lot of fun on the Wukong. I thought Zeyzal was really good on the Rakan. Rakan's just a really good pick in the meta right now. I've talked about that in plenty of other videos, so if you've watched my content, you probably already know what I think of Rakan, but, you know, it definitely showed its worth in this series, and I do continue to think that it's the strongest support in the meta, and it definitely showed its, you know, versatility, winning in Game 3, actually winning in every game of the series in this one, so definitely good stuff. But outside of Game 3, not any positives really to speak of. There were some moments. Tomio looked really good in game number 2. He was very close to keeping their team alive. I mean, the Maokai can be a really difficult thing to play into for these low mobility carries. You know, I'm not saying that, like, you know, Zeri, I was trying to think of the name. I'm not saying that Zeri's low mobility, right? But Vigar, Gwen, like, it's pretty easy to deal with these two if your Maokai is good, and I think that Tomio played awesome in that game number 2. Unfortunately, the damage from Diplex and Lost really was not following up. They were pretty bad in that one. Outside of that, not a lot of positive performances. My dud of the series is going to go to Lost in the bot lane. He was just very much outclassed by Spawn and Diamond in lane. And honestly, it was his team fighting out of lane that I was really disappointed with. He actually had some relatively good score lines in some of these games, but game 1 in particular on the Lucian Nami was just really bad for this bot lane. I don't think the Xayah looked great in this series outside of game 3, and then Zeri in game 4. Zeri Annie, I think generally as a lane is a little bit overhyped in terms of what it actually provides you, but I still think that Lost could have been able to play out that game 4 a little bit better, so he's going to get my dud of the series. He's been fine up until this point. I've been a little bit lower on him than maybe some other analysts out there. Like, I think he's a top 3, top 4 bot laner, but, you know, I've heard some people putting him, like, top 1. I just don't think that he's in that conversation for me. There are too many bot laners that I think I would take over Lost at this point. Unforgiven. Hell, I'd even put someone like Masu or Spawn in that conversation, right? Like, there are a lot of good bot laners in the NACL. Lost is just a really good one. He's not a great one, right? To me. Now, obviously, he's had some great performances in the past, but I think a lot of it is mentally. He really seems to be a different player after a couple of years in the LCS, but Diplex was also really bad in this series. The scoreline doesn't necessarily show it, but he got dominated in lane by Insanity every single game. He was consistently down 30 to 40 CS, just not really something that you want to see generally from your mid laner, and that was always the question mark with him, was could he survive lane? Because he's a phenomenal team fighter, but laning really did not seem to get any better as he moved down here to the NACL, so it still continues to be a pretty major question mark. But as we know, Cloud9 is not eliminated. They will play the winner of the series that we're going to go over next in this video, and so they still have an opportunity to win the whole thing. They can hopefully take this loss, rebound, figure out where they went wrong maybe in draft after in terms of how they played out the early games, hopefully, and they're going to be able to turn that around and, make their way to the grand final to hopefully meet up against a team like Dignitas that has now booked their ticket to the grand final. They're going to be awaiting the results of the rest of the games today, but, Dignitas guaranteeing themselves top 2 has to be a pretty darn good feeling. And now moving on to our second series of the video here, and this one is going to be just as important as the first. Of course, the first determining a team that ends up going to the finals. This one is going to eliminate our first of our top 4 teams, and so this one is an incredibly important series that you've got to win to be able to stay alive. It's between the number 4 seeded Cincinnati Fear and the number 9 seeded Team Liquid Challengers. And TLC is able to pick up a win here. A very nice run coming out from them in the playoffs. I know a lot of people, me included, weren't exactly ridiculously high on this team going into playoffs, but we all knew the talent. Even I thought they were going to go a lot further than maybe their seed suggested. And that's clearly the case, as they have punched their ticket to top 3 in the league with a win here over Fear. But before we jump any further, big shout outs to Cincinnati Fear. How can you not shout them out? I mean, how can you not be a fan of this team? By far the most successful provisional amateur team in the first split of the NACL. They showed that all of these orgs that passed up on these players were morons, quite frankly, that this group of players that couldn't find a team somehow is sitting here making it to top 4. What are these orgs doing? But congratulations to these players. They played their hearts out. We'll talk about it, but it was an incredibly back and forth series. Really, really close and really good from both teams. Like, nobody played poorly in this one. I know there's a green name and a red name, but at the end of the day, all 10 players really stepped up, and I'll explain that in more detail when we get to each individual player. But what ended up happening? Well, for TLC, they were able to take the odd number games here, 1, 3, and 5. Always a fun series when it's back and forth, and it's definitely unfortunate for Fear that it ended up going this way, but you gotta give a lot of credit to TLC, because they played really well in this series, and a lot of the talent that they had at the beginning of the year is finally starting to come out, and a lot of it's really starting to come together, and you can see that in my player of the series, which is gonna go to Arrow in the bot lane for TLC. He has been pretty up and down, I would say, over the course of the regular season, but him and Kimdown have had a phenomenal playoffs. They're a big reason why this team is here in the first place. They've stepped up their game so much considering what they were in the regular season. Not that they were garbage or anything like that. They were a solid, I would say, upper mid quality bot lane, but they weren't like a top 3 or 4 bot lane in the league, right? They've been playing like a top 3 or 4 bot lane in the league in the playoffs, and I think that's been absolutely massive for them. Obviously, everybody knows how high I am on APA, and even Bradley to an extent, but for Arrow and Kimdown to be as good as they have been in the playoffs is such a huge boom. Arrow was great in Game 1 on the Zeri. That's really the first game that I think it really stood out. He was great in Game 3 on the Varus and great in Game 5 on the Varus, really taking his name, I would say, into account here, going for Varus to get those arrows off, those Qs off, and he was really doing some great long-range damage. You pair that up with something like a Ziggs, it's actually very difficult to deal with this team comp. Things like the Kennen really make it a lot more difficult to actually engage, because if Kennen gets a good flank on you, you're just doomed in that Game 5, and just generally speaking, it felt like TLC had a lot of answers for a lot of things. Arrow, like I said, really, really good positioning. I think the Zeri positioning in particular in game number 1 really stood out to me as being phenomenal, but still a really good game number 5 as well coming out from him on the Varus, but it was a little bit of everybody in that game 5. The other players that I want to shout out, I would be remiss not to mention Bradley in the top lane. His Kennen is just absurd. This champion is doing a lot of work in a lot of different playoffs around the world right now. Obviously, we saw it in the first round of the LPL, be incredibly effective in that RNG TT series, but Bradley just plays Kennen at such a high level. He obviously has picked it up from some of the other NA players that have always been really good at Kennen. Obviously, Jenkins comes to mind, but there's been a lot of NA players that have really favored this Kennen pick, and I can see why. It gives you a lot of tools. You're going to be strong in lane. You're going to be able to farm in the mid game, and that team fight ability is ridiculous if you're able to get off a really good flank, or even if the enemy team just fully engages into you. Kennen can be a massive problem if not dealt with properly, and Bradley's just so good at this champion. He was able to dominate the top lane matchup in both games 1 and 5 in particular. Again, I would say Arrow and Bradley were the two standout members in those two games, but APA had a pretty solid series. We'll get to him. I don't think he was great in their losses. I don't think game 2 in particular on that Ahri was a particularly good game. I thought Shochi was awesome in that game 2. We will get to that in a second. But Kim down, 5 games of Rakan. Congratulations. It's got to be a lot of fun. He was really good in games 1 and 3 in particular again. Really kind of helping out Arrow, I would say, in game number 3. Not that Arrow played bad, but those initiations, he was probably my player of the game in that game 3. And then Mir. I've been a little bit, quiet, I would say, on Mir over the course of the year so far, but he's solid. Like, he's certainly gotten better in the playoffs. Not that he was, like, awful in the regular season. He was just kind of the odd man out, I would say, in terms of what to talk about in the regular season. But a lot of Wukong, still pulling out the Xin Zhao because it's a trap pick. I think this is the first time that Xin Zhao has won in the playoffs in any region. But, congrats to Mir for being able to do that in game 1. But Wukong every other game I think is smart. Gives this team a reliable engage. It also gives them early pressure. Basically everything they could want, and Mir executes on it really, really well. I don't think that there really is a lot of negatives to talk about for TLC. I think if you're looking at negatives, APA in game 2, like I said, on the Ahri, and then potentially Bradley in that game 4 on the Cho'Gath, just getting caught way too much. And Mir, I don't think, had a particularly good game 4 either. But we'll get to more of what Fear did right in that game rather than what TLC did wrong. I really do think that this team is incredibly good, and I'm glad they're starting to prove it. This organization just can't put out a bad team at this level to save their lives, and that's clear with another successful year of TLC. And then for Fear on the other side, the journey ends here. It's super unfortunate, but 4th place is still really, really damn good. Remember, this team was predicted by a lot of people, me included, to be like 15th, 16th. I think I had them 15th in my preseason power rankings, and obviously that's wrong. To end in 4th place, like, that is absurd. You beat out teams that are, ostensibly, a lot more invested in than your team and your organization, which just has to be such an incredible feeling. I mean, you placed better than 100 Thieves Academy, or Challengers, I should say. You placed better than FlyQuest Challengers. You placed better than CLG. You placed better than Wildcard. Like, all of these teams that people were super high on over the course of the year, you were better than them all. So, yes, it's frustrating that you are sitting here in a position in 4th place, but you played your hearts out, and we can talk about that in this series. A couple of really good games. Games 2 and 4 were awesome from them, and even Game 5 was a lot of fun to watch. I don't even think there were really that many, crucial mistakes. It was both teams really just going head-to-head, back-to-back-to-back. But Game 2, Shochi was awesome. I mean, those Syndra stuns were just beautiful. Syndra is legitimately one of his best champions. I think we've known that for a while. He's got a pretty big, best champion pool. Obviously, the Tryndamere comes to mind, not only from the NACL, but obviously Champions Queue. Orianna is kind of his comfort control mage, it seems. Obviously, he's got a lot more. The Syndra's great. Tristana is something he's pulled out here in a lot of the do-or-die games, and he was really good on that in Game 4. He's just very versatile as a player, and in my opinion, he was the best player on this team in this series. He was just a lot of fun to watch in these games. I think you want to talk about styles for mid laners. I don't think Shochi has a particular style. He's mostly just adaptable, and I think that's a huge trait. There's a big reason why I grew so much on him over the course of the year, and it's because I really do think that, given a year or two, he could be an LCS caliber mid laner without any question, if he's not already close to that. I think the other players that I want to shout out in this series, I think Faisal had a particularly good game number 4. I mean, Perry was the big standout of game 4 on the Gragas, but I thought Faisal's Scion was really good in that one as well. Obviously, Shochi's Tristana, the top side of the map, was really the focus for them. In game 2, it was Manui and Trevor that were kind of cleaning it up after that Syndra, and so everybody kind of, doing their work in their wins. It was just unfortunate that not everything could go according to plan in some of the losses. My dud of the series was actually a really hard decision, because I don't think anybody played bad, but if I had to give it to someone, I think I'm going to give it to Minui in the bot lane. Again, I don't think that Minui played bad at all, especially compared to some of the other dud of the series that we've given out over the course of the year, but Arrow and Kim Down were just really good in lane, and somebody had to suffer for that, and unfortunately, it was this bot lane. There were certainly moments in the early games in particular where it just wasn't very good. Game 3 stands out as a game that didn't feel very good. Game 5 was a little bit underwhelming. If the Aphelios is just a little bit more damage in some of those fights, maybe it goes a different way. Again, I'm not blaming it on him, because there's a lot of ways to set up an Aphelios that I don't think this team necessarily accomplished, but it was just unfortunate that I had to give dud of the series to somebody. I think Trevor also had some moments on the Thresh where he was just a little bit overextended. Game 3 obviously comes to mind, where that bot lane just really didn't have a very good game, and you didn't really have a lot of damage outside of the Aphelios. You're looking at a Camille top, hopefully to be able to get ahead, but it just wasn't going to happen. Outside of that, Perry was really good in that game number 4 that they were able to take, but game number 3 also wasn't particularly great from him, and you know, there's just moments here or there, like little sprinkles, I would say, that, you know, of things that they can improve on against a really good team. But when you look at the series as a whole, you've got to feel happy about Fear. Like, yes, you know, oh, maybe the bot lane could have won a little bit more, maybe stayed even, you know, given the rest of the map a chance to win. Oh, maybe Perry didn't have a great game 3. Maybe, you know, Shochi made some plays in game 3 that weren't perfect, right? Like, you could point out some of the minor mistakes I think that some of these players made throughout the series. But when you're looking at, like, the grand scheme of things, this team played way above their expectation, way above their punching level, and really, how can I criticize them for that? This is a team that's going to be running it back, I assume, in the NACL this upcoming split, summer. I hope we get to see these same 5 play together again, because this team obviously still has their slot. They are so fun to watch, they are so dynamic, and, you know, I think I am with a lot of other people that this team could absolutely continue to keep getting better, and so, yes, you go out here, and your playoffs and your spring split are over, but I think bigger things are on the horizon for this very good Fear team. And then for TLC, bigger things might be on the horizon in this next series. We're going to talk about them against C9C in just a second, but for this team to get top 3 is such an accomplishment for them. They were really struggling in the regular season for consistency, and so to see them be able to come out and take care of a Fear team that you cannot overlook even a little bit. For APA, who has really been amazing all year long to be able to step up. For Arrow and Kim Down to be playing some of their best league. Bradley, Mir, everybody did their part on TLC today, and this team really did prove that they are one of the single best teams in the NACL. And that's going to bring us to our final series of the video here. We're only going to be going over 3 here because, you know, there's only so many series left, but this is the one that is happening basically as I am recording a lot of the rest of these videos, so I'm excited to talk about it. It just finished up. We had a matchup to determine who would be moving on to face Dignitas Challengers in the grand finals here in the NACL between the number 1 seeded Cloud9 Challengers and the number 9 seeded Team Liquid Challengers. And Cloud9 is able to take it in 4 games, and this really was a dominant series overall for C9. This is a really good look for them, and I think, you know, I hate to say this, I hate to separate teams like this, but it really does prove that there is a little bit of a top 2 in the NACL right now. Dignitas obviously doing super well against C9, but TL is a good team that just was not on the same level as Cloud9 in this series, even a little bit. I like their players, and I like the way they play the game, obviously. I just talked about how highly I value what they've been able to do in the playoffs in the last series, but Cloud9's a different beast, man. They are built different, and I think that was proven in this series. It was a 3-1, but it really should have been a 3-0. I mean, Game 2 was a TLC win, but they ended up, you know, coming back after a horrendous start to the game, and Cloud9 kind of throws that one incredibly hard. You know, credit to TL for being able to come back, but it really should have been a 3-0. There really should have never been a game number 4, but Cloud9 was able to close it out when it mattered the most, which I guess is all that matters in the end. What ended up happening in this series? Well, a lot of really, really good stuff for Cloud9. They just kind of dominated every single game, especially early on. They really can't lose early against teams that are just not able to match them. Their talent is just so high. Even players that I would consider kind of weaker in the early game, players like Diplex and, you know, Lost to an extent, I think, you know, thrive in that mid game. They want to try and get out on the map and try and play as a team. Zazel to an extent as well, but Zazel's also a good laner. But it didn't really matter. I mean, they were able to generate so many consistent leads in the series. It's actually insane. My player of the series is going to go to Fake God in the top lane. It was a little bit of a difficult decision because Diplex was also so good in the mid lane, but Fake God was just awesome this series. There really is not a lot of negatives I could say about him. When you're looking at him, he was player of the game in 2 of these 4 games, maybe even 3, because he really did play kind of okay in game number 2, but game 1 on the Renekton was just a dominant performance coming out from him. He dominated that Olaf, really not a lot that Olaf can do when he's super far behind like this against a pick like Renekton. And then a phenomenal Jax game in game number 4 to close out the series. Just really good stuff coming out from Fake God. I've always been a huge fan of his. I remember one of my first like big takes on this channel back in like, what, 2017, 2018, something like that, was that Fake God was undervalued, that he was kind of stuck in this 100 Thieves system. I think he got a shot in 2019 when everything was going wrong on 100 Thieves. Someday had to get demoted down to Academy so that they could bring Ryu up to kind of try and salvage whatever was going on with that team. And I thought he played all right, but Fake God's always one of those players that I think has just been underlooked by the community, undervalued. everything that happened on Dignitas last year was a nightmare. That team, that organization was a nightmare. I don't think it's indicative of what he could do at the top level, and I think he's been showing that off here. He's arguably the best top laner in the NACL right now. I know there's quite a few players up for that consideration. Sniper's definitely in that conversation as well, but Fake God's just right there, right? He's so good. And it's almost unfair to have to play into him at this level. Bradley's a really good top laner, but Fake God was just on a different level in this series. And then Diplex in the mid lane, another really good series from him. Again, another like game 1, game 4 kind of showcase from him, but he was awesome in game number 2 on this LeBlanc. A really good game, and it's certainly not his fault that they were, unfortunately able to drop that and throw that game. But the Vigard game, he was able to catch out a bunch of people, even if I think the Renekton was great for following up. Cassidy was eventually able to get online and deal a lot of damage in the late game, and man, he was blowing people up on LeBlanc. I mean, he realistically was probably the best player in game number 2. Unfortunately, his team lost. The swing game wasn't quite as dominant per se, but it didn't need to be. You had a Zeri on the team that got super fed. Of course you were going to play to your bot lane. Like, that's just how it goes. And, that's just kind of the story of this series, where the solo laners were great when they needed them to be, and then when the jungle and bot stepped up, like, they were able to take that step back. Tomio was great in a lot of the latter half of this series. The Maokai game 3 and the Sejuani game 4 in particular, I think were really solid from him. Lost and Zazel were awesome in game number 3 in particular, but again, really good in game number, in the other games, the other wins as well. I just think it was that Zeri Rakan in game 3 that really stood out. There's just not a lot of negatives I can give this Cloud9 team. They looked like the dominant team in this series, and they looked like, honestly, TL wasn't really on their level. As for TL on the other side, it's unfortunate, right? Like, this is how your series ends after such a high, going to 5 games in a really fun series against Cincinnati Fear. To kind of have your season end with a little bit of a whimper like this, I think is unfortunate, but it's no shame to be getting top 3 in the NACL, especially when you came into the playoffs at 9th. They beat every single team in the playoffs except for Cloud9. They lost to them twice, once in upper bracket, once in lower bracket, which is just an unfortunate draw, but, to get top 3, I think is a really, really good thing for this team. Some of the positives, I think obviously the comeback in game 2 was really fun. I think Mir had some moments that were solid. Arrow was okay in some of these games, but for the most part, they just looked a little bit outclassed, especially in the early games. My dud of the series is going to go to APA in the mid lane. He just got outplayed by Diplex. There really is no other way to say it. It's unfortunate because I think APA is a really good player, but Diplex is kind of proving that maybe the demotion was a little unfortunate for him. Yes, Eminis is a really good player and is probably better than Diplex, but Diplex does not deserve to be in the NACL. Like, he's just better than a lot of the people that he's playing against him. I think that was really shown off here. Even his early game, I think, improved a lot in this series. Not sure if that's going to be sustainable, but it was a good series for that, and obviously he's going to be able to take over games in the mid to late game. That has never been a problem for him. He's one of the best mid lane team fighters in North America, like, let alone the NACL, and so Diplex was great. APA just wasn't able to keep up. He went to a lot of his classic picks. The Ziggs is obviously what you most associate with him as a player. That and the Aurelian Soul, but the Annie was a really big pick for him in this series. It just didn't end up working out. He was pretty important in their comeback, but just not really a lot that you can do outside of that game number 2 on the Lissandra. I also think that Mir was a little bit over-aggressive in some of these games. I hate bringing out the Xin Zhao. I know I'm gonna, I feel like a broken record saying this, but I think that pick is entirely overrated. Bradley got run over in the top lane. Like, I hate to say it, I love Bradley to death, and I think he's a really, really good prospect, but it just wasn't his series. Fake God was on today, and Bradley was not. So a big top lane gap there. Overall, TL was a good team that just ran into a better team. Like, that's going to happen every once in a while. It's unfortunate, but props to this Team Liquid team for being able to get top 3. I know we're ending it on a little bit of a sour note, but they certainly have nothing to feel bad about. To be able to, enter the playoffs as a 9 seed, be able to get top 3, be able to prove that you can beat a lot of the better teams in this tournament. It's nothing but good vibes coming out from TLC, and I think they're going to be able to build on this and improve in summer. It's going to be interesting. A lot of these players are really good. Like, APA, certainly not someone that I think you can keep away from the LCS for all that long. I mean, him versus Harry is really a debate I think this team is going to be having going into summer. I'm not exactly sure which way they're going to go on that, but APA is certainly not a negative here, or he's certainly in the conversation at the very least. I know there's been talk about Arrow coming up potentially for Yan. I don't really agree with that one. I think, Arrow's a good player, but I think Yan showed some really good things on TL, and I think there's definitely more room to grow there. But overall, TL, I think, did way better than they had any right to in these playoffs, and they have nothing to be ashamed of. And then for Cloud9, you're now moving on to the grand finals to take on Dignitas Challenger, a rematch of the series that we already covered. I think they're going to be a little bit more motivated this time around, knowing that there is no backup plan. It's do or die in the grand finals, and as we saw with Cloud9 in this series, when their backs are against the wall, they tend to break the wall down. All right, that is going to do it for my NACL Round 5 and Semifinals overview and analysis. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm really excited. There's only one more series left to cover in the NACL, and that is Finals. That's going to be coming later in the week. I know Finals are going to be happening this weekend, but I had to plan a little bit around some of the other regions that have to get videos out certain days, so I'm sorry if this doesn't come out until like Tuesday or Wednesday. I'll try to get it out a little bit earlier, but I just can't promise anything. I really do appreciate you guys enjoying these videos. Of course, if you do, let me know down in the comment section below how much you like these videos and whether or not they can be improved. It's going to be a little bit of a different format next time with only one series to cover. I'm going to be going game by game. If you follow some of my other region coverage, you'll kind of know what that looks like here, but the finals are going to get a little bit of a makeover, so, it's going to be a little bit of a different format. I hope you guys enjoy that. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, though, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it helps get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm really appreciative of. And then, obviously, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. I don't only cover the NACL on this channel, although I do cover it. I cover all 4 of the major regions as well, and with everybody kind of getting into playoffs right now, there's no better time to subscribe. We are uploading 33 days in a row. We're about halfway through that with everything happening in the playoffs, and so if you want a one-stop shop for all your LoL esports content, this is probably the place to be. If you enjoyed this video, I pretty much guarantee you're going to enjoy the rest of the content that I make. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.